The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Minho Park's penthouse in streaks of gold and silver. For Nia Thompson, stepping into this world of luxury for the first time felt like walking on a tightrope. One misstep and she could fall from being just an employee to something far less welcome. She adjusted the apron at her waist, straightened her shoulders, and reminded herself, professionalism above all. Minho watched silently from the shadows, his tall frame imposing yet calm. No one had ever moved through his domain with such quiet confidence, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, it intrigued him. There was something about the way she handled herself, even under his piercing gaze, that made him pause. "Undress me," he whispered, his voice low, almost a tremor in the silence. Nia froze, her mind racing, until she realized he wasn't speaking literally. The wardrobe, he wanted her opinion on the attire prepared for the gala tomorrow. Relief washed over her, accompanied by a faint thrill she didn't quite expect. Her hands shook slightly as she laid out the clothes, organizing fabrics and accessories with meticulous care. She caught his eyes lingering on her, a momentary softness beneath the cold exterior. Minho, who was rarely seen outside the walls of his work, found himself leaning closer, just enough to feel the warmth she carried without understanding why. Time seemed to slow. A shared glance, a subtle nod, and a tension neither of them could name hung between them. Something was starting, not yet love, not yet friendship, but a thread weaving them together in ways both would soon feel impossible to ignore. By the time the clock struck midnight, Nia knew this first night would be remembered long after the chores were done. And Minho, for the first time in years, wondered if someone could truly see the man behind the billionaire. The next morning, Nia moved quietly through the penthouse, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries. The scent of roasted beans mingled with the faint aroma of Minho's cologne that lingered in the air. She reminded herself that this was still a job, yet something about the way he had watched her last night tugged at her attention. Minho, seated at his grand desk, didn't greet her immediately. He often didn't. But today he glanced up, his dark eyes lingering just a moment too long. For a heartbeat, Nia felt as though he were searching for something inside her, something beyond the boundaries of their professional roles. She shook the thought away and set the tray down with careful precision. As the day passed, she noticed little details. The books he read, the way he organized his papers, even the faintest crease of worry in his forehead when he worked late into the evening. She found herself leaving a small cup of tea near his desk, an unspoken gesture of kindness. Minho, who rarely accepted anyone's help, lifted the cup, paused, and for a moment, allowed a soft, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. That night, when the city's hum quieted and the penthouse was bathed in the silver glow of moonlight, Minho lingered by the window. Nia, carrying folded laundry, passed behind him. Their shoulders brushed lightly, a fleeting, innocent contact, but it left a warmth neither of them could ignore. For the first time, Minho wondered if curiosity could become something more. Nia, sensing the unspoken, felt a flutter of anticipation, as if the penthouse itself held its breath. Something was building, subtle, quiet, and undeniable. And both of them, though unwilling to admit it, were waiting for the moment that thread between them would finally pull taut. Days passed in a rhythm both predictable and strangely comforting. Nia grew accustomed to Minho's meticulous ways, and he, in turn, began noticing the small details about her that went beyond her duties. The way her laughter lingered, the careful way she arranged his belongings, the quiet confidence in her movements. One evening, a stack of documents fell from his desk while he was engrossed in reviewing contracts. Without thinking, Nia rushed forward, catching several papers before they scattered across the floor. Minho turned abruptly, eyes wide with surprise, and for a brief moment, the walls he had built around himself faltered. "Thank you," he said quietly, his usual formality softened by something she couldn't name. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and there was a flicker of something deeper there, a vulnerability he rarely showed anyone. Without thinking, she stepped closer, and he did something even more uncharacteristic. He reached out, pulling her into a brief but firm hug. Nia froze at first, startled by the intimacy, but then felt a warmth that wasn't just physical. It was a quiet acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. When they pulled back, both glanced away, cheeks slightly flushed. The room seemed different now, charged with an unspoken understanding. Minho, who had always controlled every aspect of his life, found himself shaken by the simple act. Nia, who had prided herself on maintaining professionalism, felt her heart beat faster than it should. That hug, fleeting as it was, marked the first step toward something neither of them could define yet, but both felt it growing between them, subtle and undeniable. In that quiet penthouse, amid the hum of the city below, A new rhythm was beginning, one built not just on duty but on curiosity, connection, and the promise of what might come. A sudden storm rattled the penthouse windows, the wind tugging at the curtains as rain splashed against the glass. Nia had been organizing the library when the first thunderclap echoed through the apartment. Minho appeared silently behind her, holding an umbrella despite being indoors, a small, almost absurd gesture that made her smile. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low but firm. There was a tension in it she hadn't heard before, a hint of worry that didn't match his usual composed demeanor. She shrugged, trying to mask her nerves, but the storm had a way of loosening her carefully maintained poise. "It's fine. I like the rain." They ended up in his study, the rain drumming steadily against the glass as the room filled with the scent of paper and polished wood. The storm outside made the room feel intimate, the usual barriers of employer and employee temporarily forgotten. Minho poured them both tea, hands steady, and for the first time, invited her to sit across from him as an equal, not a subordinate. Nia found herself speaking freely, telling him about her childhood, the struggles of carving a path in a world that often underestimated her. Minho listened, uncharacteristically silent but attentive, until he began to share his own burdens, expectations, loneliness, the weight of responsibility. When the storm finally softened, they stood in a quiet moment, the room soaked in the soft glow of lamplight. Without a word, Minho stepped closer, and they shared a hug, warm, steady, and filled with the trust they had begun to build. It wasn't love yet, but it was something stronger, a bridge between two worlds, a bond that promised understanding and comfort. And as the rain faded, both knew that this night, this hug, would linger in their hearts far longer than the storm ever could. The penthouse felt quieter than usual that evening, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Nia moved about her tasks with practiced grace, yet she couldn't ignore the sensation of eyes following her from across the room. Minho stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes, and for a moment she wondered if he even realized she had noticed. He had always been reserved, almost untouchable in his composure, but now there was something different. Something vulnerable. And yet, that same cold precision lingered, keeping her guessing. Nia caught herself wondering why his gaze felt heavier, why it lingered longer than necessary. At dinner, Minho spoke little, but his attention was unmistakable. When she reached for the water glass, he subtly handed it to her, their fingers brushing. The contact was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a shiver through both of them. Nia blushed, quickly looking away while Minho's jaw tightened, an unspoken acknowledgement that neither fully understood their growing fascination. Later, as she carried laundry through the hallway, she glanced over her shoulder. Minho was watching again, leaning against the doorway, silent but focused. Nia paused, a fluttering feeling rising in her chest. There was curiosity in his eyes, yes, but also something deeper, an emotion he never let anyone see. She wanted to ask, to understand, yet words failed her. Instead, she simply smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips, and moved on. Minho's eyes followed her until she disappeared around the corner, and for the first time, he admitted to himself that he wanted more than just professional interaction. The tension between them was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but it hummed in the air, an electric thread pulling them closer even when neither dared to cross the line. Something was building, quiet and irresistible, and both of them could feel it. It was late afternoon when Nia's ankle twisted on the marble floor, a sharp pain shooting up her leg. She tried to steady herself, but the ache forced her to sink to the ground, biting back a gasp. The penthouse felt unusually large and silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Before she could call out, Minho appeared, moving swiftly yet quietly. "Are you hurt?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge of concern she had rarely heard before. Nia hesitated, stubbornness flaring, but the sharp pain left her no choice. "A little," she admitted, trying to mask the discomfort. Without another word, Minho knelt and helped her up, his hands firm yet careful. When he lifted her in his arms to carry her to the bedroom, the closeness was immediate and undeniable. Nia felt the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was not romantic in the overt sense, but it was intimate in a way that mattered. Trust, care, and an unspoken connection all wrapped into one. Once seated safely on the bed, Minho gently examined her ankle, adjusting her position to ease the pain. Nia looked at him, noticing the rare softness in his eyes, the subtle attentiveness that made her chest tighten. I should have been more careful," she whispered, half embarrassed, half relieved. "You're fine now," he replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then, as if compelled by some unspoken instinct, he pulled her into a hug, steady, grounding, and full of quiet reassurance. For a long moment they stayed like that, allowing the comfort of proximity to speak louder than any words could. In that embrace, Nia felt a trust she hadn't known she could give so freely, and Minho felt the fragile beginnings of something he never expected to let himself feel. Connection, warmth, and maybe the first hint of love. The city was a blur behind them as Minho drove them to the countryside, the hum of the car engine and the open road offering a rare sense of freedom. Nia watched the world pass by, trees and rooftops giving way to open fields, and for the first time in weeks she felt completely at ease. Minho, normally composed and reserved, seemed lighter here. He pointed out small details, a flock of birds, a distant farmhouse, and Nia laughed at his unexpected delight in the simple things. The sound was new to him, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years, secretly enjoying the way her presence seemed to brighten even the quietest moments. They walked along a winding path, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind them. Nia told stories of her childhood adventures, of summer days filled with laughter and mischief, and Minho listened intently, occasionally teasing her gently. Each shared story built a bridge between them, turning their professional acquaintance into genuine companionship. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, they paused on a small hill overlooking the valley. Words felt unnecessary, the world around them was too beautiful, too fleeting to interrupt with conversation. Minho stepped closer and without thinking wrapped Nia in a warm, gentle hug. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the tailored suit he always wore so meticulously. It was a hug that spoke volumes, gratitude, admiration, and a deepening connection neither wanted to name yet. In that moment, the distance between employer and employee dissolved completely, replaced by trust, comfort, and a quiet, unspoken promise. When they finally pulled apart, the sky had darkened, but the warmth lingered. Both knew this weekend had changed something irrevocably. Their bond had grown stronger and the thread between them had tightened, ready to pull them ever closer. The penthouse was quiet that evening, the city lights casting long reflections across the polished floors. Nia sat on the edge of the couch, a cup of tea warming her hands, while Minho stood near the window, staring out at the skyline as if searching for answers among the stars. Finally he turned and for a moment, the usual reserve in his eyes softened into something raw, almost vulnerable. "Nia," he began, his voice steady but lower than usual, I feel something I've never allowed myself to feel before." Nia's heart skipped. She had sensed the pull between them, the subtle glances and fleeting touches, but hearing it spoken aloud made it impossible to ignore. She set her cup down carefully, her own voice trembling slightly. I think I've been feeling it too," she admitted. "I didn't know if it was just imagination or if you felt it too." For a long moment neither spoke. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence heavy yet comforting. Then without thinking, Minho stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. It was steady and warm, full of unspoken emotions, admission, trust, and a tentative surrender to feelings both had kept hidden. Nia rested her head against his chest, hearing the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat, and realized that this closeness was more than just comfort. It was the first step toward something enduring, something neither could deny. When they finally pulled apart, their eyes met, both sets shining with the acknowledgement of their connection. Words weren't necessary, the hug had said it all. They had crossed a line from curiosity and tension into trust and affection, the foundation of a bond that promised more than either had ever expected. And in that quiet penthouse, under the glow of the city lights, the future no longer seemed uncertain, it seemed full of possibility. The penthouse hummed with tension that evening. Minho's office phone rang constantly, emails pinged without end, and the weight of a looming business threat pressed down on him like a storm cloud. Nia watched from the doorway, her heart tightening. She wanted to retreat, to give him space, but something inside urged her forward. "You shouldn't handle this alone," she said softly, stepping closer. Minho's gaze met hers, sharp yet tired, and for a moment, the fortress he had built around himself seemed to crack. He gestured for her to join him, and she did, sitting quietly by his side as he explained the problem, a rival company threatening to undermine his latest deal. Nia listened, offering insight where she could, her calmness grounding him in ways spreadsheets and legal teams never could. Hours passed, and the storm outside mirrored the tension in the room. Minho, usually stoic, let himself lean on her presence, finding comfort in her unwavering support. When a crucial decision was finally made, he exhaled deeply, the pressure lifting slightly. Without thinking, he reached for her and pulled her into a hug, long, steady, protective. Nia rested against him, feeling the release of tension not only in him but in herself. In that embrace, words were unnecessary. The hug conveyed gratitude, relief, and trust, emotions neither of them had fully expressed before. It was a reminder that, despite titles, wealth, or societal roles, they could rely on each other wholly and without pretense. When they finally pulled back, the penthouse felt different, lighter, safer. The bond between them had grown stronger, tested not by romantic gestures alone, but by shared trials and unwavering support. And both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their connection deepened by more than mere attraction. It was built on trust, care, and something far more enduring. The rooftop was quiet, the city lights stretching endlessly below them. Nia stood beside Minho, the soft breeze tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of the night. For weeks, months even, they had navigated the unspoken, the tension, the curiosity that had grown into something neither had dared to name, until now. Minho turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the glow of the skyline. "Nia," he said softly, "I don't want to hide how I feel anymore. You mean more to me than I ever expected. I love you." Her heart raced and a smile spread across her face, bright and certain. "I love you too, Minho. I've been hoping you'd say it." Without hesitation, he pulled her into a warm, steady hug, the kind that held promises of protection, trust, and unwavering devotion. Nia rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the rhythm that had become her anchor over these months. They stayed like that for a long moment, letting the city fade away, letting the world shrink until it was just the two of them, connected by something far stronger than attraction. It was understanding, comfort, and a shared future waiting to unfold. When they finally pulled back, their hands intertwined, Minho smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his features. "Forever," he whispered, and Nia nodded, feeling the words settle deep within her heart. The night sky stretched above them, vast and full of possibilities. Together they had crossed from curiosity to connection, from distance to intimacy, and now, finally, to love. And in that quiet, perfect moment, they knew their story was only just beginning.